Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Belly to Belly. And we're here talking with great friend Micah Boster. Welcome, Micah.
Hey, how you doing, Bill?
Great. So our topic today is scale-up hiring strategies. And your company, Nighthawk Advisors, you've had so much experience in working with scale-up companies. Before we kind of dive into the topic, I'd love to just get a quick intro to Nighthawk Advisors and your work, just so our audience has context to your comments.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a tech lifer. I've spent most of my career in sales and partnerships and operations strategy. And so I spent the first half of my career at Google. And then about 10 years ago, I moved back to New York, and I've done early stage operations in four different New York City startups, and kind of gotten a bunch of experience seeing what goes right and what goes wrong. I started Nighthawk about 6 or 8 months ago, because I'd seen that, the climate's changing and businesses need to execute better, and startups are not always great at that. So I take an approach where I look at the business operating system of the company. We really dig in on sort of all of the how you do things, how you set goals, how you set resourcing plans, how you execute against those. And we look at ways for companies to improve those and build a strong foundation so that everybody can scale and everybody can do the things that their investors want them to do, so that they can keep raising money and growing. Because the days of just getting a big check and then doing whatever for a couple of years as you sort of try and fall into product market fit are really over. It's a different climate, and money's expensive now, and things are different.
Besides the fact that people want to succeed. So yeah,
Exactly. Plus every founder out there wants to, everybody wants to be Mark Zuckerberg, right? And everybody wants to grow something that really is impactful. And in order to do that, you need to build a foundation so that you have something to get off of, and you have to build the right team in order to do it with you.
That's great. Well, fantastic. So we had a call last week, and which was great. It was great to learn more about what you do. But while we were talking, one of the things you mentioned that just kind of really intrigued me was talking about the process that you've seen work really well for scale-ups in terms of hiring. And I guess what I'd like to do first is maybe ask you about where do scale-ups get challenged when they hire? What are the kind of the big mistakes that you see them make?
Yeah, so I see a lot of companies as they start to, maybe they bring in a little bit of money, a seed round or an A or whatever. You start to have some resources, you start to get some customer traction, and then you start to have problems, right? Because complexity becomes a thing. And in order to solve those problems, you start hiring people. And a lot of times, because most people have a million things going on and they don't have a clear plan, the hiring can get reactive, right? Oh man, we need to get a marketing person because all of a sudden we've got, we need more demand, we need to drive more outreach, we need to get out there, whatever it is, sales or engineering or product marketing or all kinds of things. And people go out and they try and hire somebody, and they try and hire somebody fairly senior to kind of own the function. And a lot of times the founders don't really know what the function should be doing, right? So you end up with this really kind of weird situation where you're trying to hire a very senior person. They're very expensive. You don't know that person, and you don't even know kind of what they're really capable of doing. And you end up, bringing people on, and they're not usually the right person. And part of that is, when you're hiring senior talent as a startup, you're fishing in a little bit of a weird pond, right? Being an early stage employee at a startup who's not a founder, you take a lot of risk and you don't get founder level equity. So, a lot of the folks who wind up in that pool are maybe switching to startups from big companies. Maybe they've had a series of things that didn't totally go right. They're usually sort of a little bit, it's not always the A+ pool, and you are disadvantaged as a company trying to hire these people, right? Because you don't have the resources, you're not Google, you're not a name, you're not even a startup, necessarily with traction. So you're sort of selling them on your dream and some equity upside. And that's hard, right? So what I've seen time and time again is people bring in senior people too early who end up not being the right fit or the right people. They spend a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of energy in the company, and then they have to move on, 3 or 6 or 9 months later, because they sort of screwed up. And if you do that too early, when resources are really at a premium, you can really put yourself behind the 8 ball.
That makes total sense, and I've seen this happen so many times. So, how do companies solve that then?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to do. One thing, and this is like, it sounds trivial, but it's funny how infrequently companies, in my experience, do this. One thing is to be really clear at the very beginning when you're putting together your founding team, what you're trying to achieve, and sort of what's core and what's not core. So for some companies, technology is absolutely core. If you're starting an AI company, you better have a technical co-founder, and they better know the deal, because if you try and bring that stuff on, you don't have any way to check the people who you bring on and know whether or not the approach they're taking makes sense or anything like that. If you're generating IP, you need a technical co-founder. If you're not, for example, I was the COO of a company that we were creating tools for yellow taxis to compete against Uber and Lyft. We had a great taxi meter, and we built some custom software on top of it. And the software was sophisticated, but it was pretty straightforward. We didn't need necessarily a CTO on the founding team. That was something we could bring on board, because what was core was actually the customer service and the outreach and the positioning and the regulatory work and all of these other things. So it's important, first of all, to make sure that your founding team has core bases covered. And then I think that once you get past that, I think that the thing that I suggest, until you get to MVP, certainly, and probably until you get to product market fit, I highly suggest that most small companies spend more time looking in the fractionals market, and try and bring on specific people to solve specific roles for a specific time frame. And I think that is, it's interesting. It changes you from being kind of a seller, where you're trying to sell this job and try and get somebody on board and you're trying to convince them that it's a good idea, to a buyer, because now all of a sudden you're talking to this pool of experienced people who want to come work for you, who want another client, who want to pick you up. And you can bring in people for substantially less money. They're not going to be full time, but for substantially less money, who can really own a function and deliver results. And that will get you through this development period until you really understand what your product market fit looks like, what your growth plans look like, and who you need to scale. And then you can bring in your senior leadership team. You're going to have an easier sell at that point to bring them on board. They're going to have an easier job to walk into because they're not starting from scratch. So that is the broad approach that I recommend to most companies. There's obvious exceptions to this. If you raise, $40 million or whatever, your growth acceleration might look different. But for most companies, I think this is a really sound approach. And, Bill, it gets back to this sort of analogy that I think of when you think of the life cycle of a startup, which is it's like a train, right? And it's cruising and it's stopping all the time. And people get on and people get off. And the same people generally don't ride the train from the beginning to the end. And the thing about the train metaphor is, like, at the beginning, it's like you're leaving Grand Central Station and going to the suburbs or something. You're making a million stops. You're making all the stops in the city and in the close-in suburbs and all of that. And you're going to be changing. Your needs are going to change. The people you bring on are going to change. The problems you need to solve are going to change. When you get a little farther out in the countryside, you go express. And then all of a sudden, you need people who can deliver for longer periods of time and sort of drive a different set of results. But I think that if you think about that, your goal as a founder is to A, preserve capital and be disciplined about how you spend it, and B, preserve as much flexibility as you can so that your team can kind of grow and scale with you.
That's so impressive. Yeah, no, as you were talking, I was thinking about a model of company growth that that we used to use quite a bit, and basically it would equate essentially the life cycle of a company to essentially a person growing. So you go from sort of infancy, through adolescence, through teenage years, sort of onto various maturity levels. But you think of the trouble or challenges that an infant can get into is not anywhere near what a teenager can get into. And so, I mean, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about
as the father of a 3-year-old, I'm not sure that's true, but
yeah, but the whole idea that that the sort of wisdom you need and the experience that you need at adolescence is totally different than what you need to get to transition those various other stages. So I love exactly what you're saying. It makes total sense.
Yeah, and the 0 to 1 metaphor is a fairly common trope in sort of talking about startups. And I think just having spent 10 years kind of in the trenches making things work in these early stage companies, they're just so different than even a Series B kind of company, where like startups generally at the beginning barely even look like companies, right? Like they're weird, stressful school projects almost, right? Where everyone's running around like crazy people trying to get things done, and everybody's doing 37 different things at once. And I think the bottom line with these really early stage companies is there's not really any structure in place, but things need to get done, and you need people who are capable of kind of building the airplane while you're flying, right? Who are able to not only execute and get things done, but also do it in a way where like all of a sudden, they don't have the marketing budget they thought, or all of a sudden, their partner bails on them, or their deal didn't close, and all of a sudden their fundraising's delayed, and you got to figure it out, right? That's not really a skill set that exists, or that's as important as you go on, and it's not always the same people who are good at that.
Right. No, yeah, the experience of having seen it before and being able to navigate through those chasms is probably really, really
Yeah.
critical. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So
Yeah.
when you think of founders that and this may be shifting just real quickly for a second, if you think of founders that you've seen be the most successful, is there a common trait that each of them tends to have?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this sounds cliche, but I think it's on some level, it's humility. I think being a founder is sort of an inherently egomaniacal thing to do. I don't mean that even badly, right? But you
No.
decide that you have an idea, you're going to change the world with it, right? I mean, that's the audaciousness of it is sort of the point.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the founders I think of one in particular who I worked with, who's a multi-time founder, and she's really amazing and impressive, and has had several good exits. I think they know the things that they're good at and the things that they're not good at, and they believe in expertise and they believe in help and support, right? So this is why I think it's important. I talked about how you have to like really think about the skills on your founding team and things like that, and you need to be honest about if you've never thought about product, and if you don't even know what product means, you probably shouldn't be overseeing the product team, because you're going to forget, you're not going to know all the questions to ask, and I think the founders who have taken an approach of like, I'm good at certain things and I don't know anything about the rest of it, so I need smart people to help me, I think is by far the best approach. And I think that kind of, if you can kill your ego in that domain, I think it opens up a huge range of possibilities of staffing your company with, really good fractional talent or whatever you need in order to kind of bring it on board. So that to me has been the most important thing that I think I've seen.
I love it. That's perfect. Well, Micah, I think we're pretty close to the end of time, but I really appreciate you taking the time today to share these thoughts, and so powerful. And is it okay if we share your information in the description below?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love it. And if any of your listeners have questions about this or anything, feel free to reach out. I'm very available and I'd love to talk.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments.
Cool. Thanks, Bill.